Before we get started, I'll give a quick introduction and give some guidelines here, with the Q&A. So feel free to ask questions and put them in the Q&A. There'll be about 15, 20 minutes at the end of this for questions for the panelists. We'll talk for about 45 minutes and we'll get to the background and what all these thoughts that the panelists have. So before we get started, I'll introduce the panel here. So first we have Terah Putman, and she began her career at Kellogg's in January of 2000 as an intern. And after receiving her Master's in Market Research from University of Georgia, she worked across a range of cold cereal brands from Frosted Flakes to Apple Jacks, Corn Pops, Special K, and so on. Terah left Kellogg's at the end of 2005 to pursue a passion in qualitative research, where she worked at Harper and then started her own company, still working with a diverse set of clients across industries such as CPG, consumer appliance, etc. And during that time, she also held positions as a chapter chairperson for QRCA and was a marketing research instructor at Western Michigan University. Then she returned to Kellogg's in 2007, where she supports the role of the Director of Next Generation Insights. And beginning in 2020 is when she started that role. And this includes responsibility for behavioral science, implementation across research tools, maintenance of Kellogg's knowledge management platform, and internal consumer research panel, Kitchen Insiders, that is supported by QuestionPro. So welcome, Terah. And next up, we have Kyle Hudson. So Kyle is a tenured sports business executive with a successful record of accomplishment in sales, member retention, guest experience, partnership development, and relationship management. She is currently a partner at the BCJ Group, helping organizations connect to their corporate cultures, to the employee and customer experience. Prior to joining the BCJ Group, Kyle worked for the NBA, where she partnered with teams across the NBA, WNBA, and NBA G Leagues on strategies for retaining, engaging, and developing ticket buyers. Kyle worked with the Phoenix Suns and Mercury over 8 years, with positions spanning new business, sales, client retention, guest experience, business development. She also led sponsorship activation for Super Bowls, a host committee in Texas. In this role, she was responsible for onboarding, delivering best-in-class execution of contractual rights, and guiding each of the 30-plus partners on their activation within Super Bowl Live. And then next up, we have Bill Trovinger, who he has been in the market research industry for a decade. He's passionate about business driving decisions through a deep understanding of consumer behavior. And his experiences spanned reviving legacy brands through legendary campaigns with Old Spice to launching a new world grocery store concept filled with new technology and brands at Amazon. This year, he was named one of the 50 most influential market researchers by actively driving market research conversations on LinkedIn. And I will say that Bill has some really funny stuff on LinkedIn, so make sure you follow him there. And then outside of work, he is a world wiffle ball champion and an adjunct professor at Seattle University and a great dad as well. So Bill, Kyle, and Terah, welcome to the panel today.
For having us.
Yeah, thanks for letting us be here.
Awesome. Well, to get started here, again, make sure you put in your questions in the Q&A functionality here. We'll be answering those as we get going here. So I guess starting out, Terah, we'll start with you. How do experiences play a role in your research?
I think experiences are really critical to all of the work that we do, because being a food company, in addition to just nourishing people, I think what really differentiates our brands is the experience of the whole consumption moment, from the packaging to the brand to the nostalgia or the history that goes with the advertising, all the way through to the way that food tends to bring people together and help people form bonds and connections. And so I think we talked about this a little bit already, but I think also the experiences that go into even just the research that we do and thinking about it not only as a one-way dialogue where we're getting information, but it's actually part of the larger experience that people have with our company. And we always want to make sure it's just as fun and engaging for our consumers to participate in studies or interviews or shop-alongs or whatever it is, as it is informative for us.
Great. Kyle, do you have any thoughts on that? How experiences play a role in the research or work that you're doing at BCJ Group or the MBA?
Yeah, I think I'm sure Bill and Terah would agree. I mean, it's all about creating loyal customers, people that are going to be loyal to our brands. And it's interesting in the sports world, we work so hard, obviously, to create this amazing experience as it pertains to the sport that particular ticket buyer is bought into. But I think what's amazing about teams across a number of different leagues is that we're really trying to create that experience that's truly all encompassing. So I think that's where the data piece really comes into piece, where it's about understanding who our consumers are and what other interests and passions they have beyond just the sports organization that they're a part of, so that we can really kind of entice them to attend events that are kind of, part of that passion or interest, and really kind of create those different types of moments that, again, kind of really help create that loyalty for that particular brand. Yeah,
and Bill, I know when we talked, you mentioned something similar, so I'll let you take it away here.
Yeah, absolutely. Being at Amazon in the grocery world, I think Amazon is trying to constantly improve customer experience. That's where you see a lot of their big innovation come from. But grocery, again, tons of innovation, but I think there's also been a very clear format and structure to grocery shopping for the last, however many years. And Amazon's trying to kind of recreate that experience and add some new pieces to that, or some new dynamics to that. And what's been really interesting in working in that space has been trying to get such a technology forward company, such a quick moving company, to take that step back and say, there's tried and true research methods that answer these questions that don't fit the typical, Amazon template for research, and getting the buy-in to go do those. So I think there's understanding the customer experience from the customer, and not just using the data that's coming in constantly from the Amazon platform.
Yeah, that's interesting. Terah, I think when we spoke, you mentioned something similar, how Kellogg's is pretty traditional in the research and you're trying to push them forward. So are there some techniques, or how do you battle that, or what are some success stories that you've had internally there?
Yeah, I think, there's always the benefits and the drawbacks of being a company that's been around for over 100 years, and that we have a lot of legacy tools, and we're really comfortable using the things that we've done and are tried and tested. But I think COVID has taught us many things about behavioral change and how the world can change very quickly. And I'm just trying to leverage that momentum, I think, with the company to start to think about being willing to embrace change in some of these ways. There's so many new, more behaviorally based methodologies out there. There's so many new ways to connect with our consumers and learn from them. And not to say you're ever just going to walk away from something just for the sake of the new. I think it really does call into question, what's the right time to let go of some of these things that we've been holding on to for a really long time, and find ways to evolve to a better way to learn.
Right. That makes sense. Some of the, just kind of sticking with you here for a minute, Terah, some of those things that you want to leave behind and better ways to learn. Are there successful strategies that you've seen? Is it education? Is it like the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, or what are some of those ways?
Yeah, I'm really much, I'm more in the mindset of, if you find what's in it for them, then people are more likely to let go of their change aversion. So, as much as we want consumers to change behavior and try new things, as researchers, we're just as averse to changing behavior and trying new things because of that loss aversion. We don't want to do a research study and then get bad results, or not get results we're comfortable in, and then it reflects badly on us. So I think people are more game to put that risk out there and try something new when they recognize that what they're doing today isn't really working for them anymore. So it takes an investment of time to sit down and talk with somebody about, yes, this is what we've always done. It's what you're comfortable with, but what do you want it to be? What do you wish for? What would you like it to be? And if you can find a way to bring them a new tool or a new approach that delivers on some of those unmet needs, it's like applying what we know about what we do for consumers, but to ourselves. If we find an unmet need or a tension point in the research and how it's working, then it enables us to really bring something that they see the value in. And maybe it does require a parallel test where they can not fully let go of the old before they embrace the new. But I think that's when I've been most successful, is when you can find something that people look at and say, yes, this is solving what I was missing for.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And then, Kyle, I know at the BCJ Group, you guys do a lot with employees and getting them to work on their experiences, and that trickles down to consumers. So do you guys have strategies or tactics that you coach employees on to help, I guess, embrace change that you can speak about?
Yeah, I think, it's really about, getting in and having conversations with, everyone from the frontline staff all the way up to the leadership group, and really kind of creating that environment where there's communication happening across all levels. We're getting a feel for, the frontline staff on what they're hearing from the customers, and that's translating all the way up to leadership. I think certainly an opportunity to, to Terah's point, like not only just understanding what the customers go through day to day as they're interacting with our brand, but having our employees kind of put themselves in the shoes of the customer and walking through what that customer journey and experience looks like. I think Netflix has an amazing approach where they just really focus on those employees, like trying to identify what the hiccups and what the problems could occur with their customers before it actually happens. So it's really about getting them involved in that process from the very start. And I think that certainly helps with from an innovation standpoint as well.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And I know Bill and Terah, you guys both brought up around, getting in the shoes of the consumer, and that's so valuable even in today's big data age and so forth. So Bill, I'll pass it to you and ask you a question around that. Like, what are some of the ways that you're getting in the shoes of the consumer, especially as you're trying to balance, obviously, the digital grocery store experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is bringing together, again, all the data that's coming in from Amazon. If you've been to one of the new grocery stores, if you're in Chicago or LA, most people are checking in using their palm print. If you've seen this technology, that's then linked to your Amazon account. Again, you can imagine all of the data that's associated with all of those actions that you're then taking and purchase behavior. But those are still just new steps to grocery shopping. That's there's additional pieces there. There's new products in the stores that we're trying to launch. And again, it's one of those, my team is looking for that high tech, very scalable, very process oriented solution. And it's, I don't have a good one yet, other than here's the data, here's part of the story. But what we're using now is some, kind of FaceTime type platforms that are helping us interview customers as they're in the store. So we still have a lot of rules around being 6 feet away from people, travel restrictions. So a lot of virtual interviewing. And again, that, which seems like a very minor change in this kind of modern day age of us being on Zoom calls all day, every day, has taken a lot of selling. It's been a lot of linking that to our objectives and saying, here's the 10 things leadership needs us to accomplish this year. And again, not knowing sort of when the travel ban will be lifted for us and when I can go in store. We don't have a local store yet. It's been longer selling than I ever imagined to get people even over that small of a hurdle to say, we need to go be in store with folks. Let's figure out how to go do that. And technology's kind of been our key there. But again, it's not a battle I would have imagined fighting a year ago.
No, that's definitely true. I think that makes a lot of sense. And Terah, I know you mentioned something similar when we spoke around, but you feel like that personal connection has been lost in obviously the COVID times, and that you really wanted a way that your team, I guess I'll back up, found it valuable to get out when they're going to focus groups in local markets, do some shop alongs, go see what the product looks like. So how are you battling that now, and what are some ways that maybe some tools or techniques has helped you through this?
Yeah, I think that goes into the camp of trends that were already started before COVID that COVID just amplified. I think for many years, big data had started to pull us away from that more personal in-person connection, the more qualitative oriented time that we spent out with consumers in their homes or in stores with them, or even just, in a meeting room in a hotel, but face to face with them. Mm-hmm. And so we talked about this a little bit. I think, there's so much richness in data that it felt like they were equal, or that social mining and other things would even be better than the really inefficient traveling around the countryside to meet with a handful of people in each city. But I think what we lost along the way is the human connection, in that, we get very insular as big companies, and we're sort of in our building and in our head and around people who are very much like us. And that ability to get out and see our consumers and how they are so diverse and different around the country, and just how the markets are different, I think has really been a missing piece. That even just, prior to COVID, with people cutting back on travel budgets and using technology more, had already started. And then COVID's just really brought it into sharp focus, how much we're missing that human connection with people. And so I think what we've been trying to do to compensate is largely what Bill said: just use the technology we have, more video, more people are comfortable on video now. So there's more, willingness for people to sit and do Zoom-based kind of qualitative, or respond to survey questions with video rather than with a scaled response. And so any sort of human connection where we can bring consumers to life is really where we're trying to lean in and get more of that.
Right. And I think you brought up an interesting point where, I think COVID has amplified things that were already becoming more prominent, right? So I think that's interesting. And Kyle, I know when we talked, you mentioned that you do when you're at the NBA, you have this annual season ticket holder member survey that you would do, all really around to shape experiences, right? And to make sure that you're connecting with the consumer. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that and how that helped you in shaping these experiences for the season ticket holders.
Yeah, I would just, first off, kind of going back to focus groups, like I'm a big believer in focus groups. We would conduct them all the time across all of our sports teams. And obviously it has a direct correlation between a member that attends a focus group to renewal. But it's interesting, the folks that we get to participate in surveying and focus groups, it's like two different spectrums. It's like they're really, really unhappy with the product or they love the product. And both of those are, like, honestly, even the unhappy folks, like, they're still passionate and they're likely to renew. It's like that middle ground, the people that just don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. And those are the folks that we would consider fence sitters, and like, what are the tactics out there to try and get them involved and provide their feedback and meet us in person and create that connection. Like, those are the groups of people that you really want to hone in on. But what Dan and I were talking about specifically on this annual member survey is just how the feedback has changed over the years, and especially as we're moving into this digital world, and the demographic of season ticket members are starting to skew a little bit younger. You're finding that not every season ticket member wants or needs like a personal account executive to proactively reach out and create that relationship. When I first started with the Suns back in 2004, that was really the first year that we developed this proactive service approach, where it's not just customer service, like you're creating relationships with people, you're learning about them, asking them questions. And now it's kind of at a point where, we have to customize that experience for each member, and understand that if they don't want a personal representative, that's fine, but we just need to make sure that we're addressing all of the needs they do have, like quick problem solving, unique and experiential events, things like that. So it's just interesting, obviously, how the data changes so quickly year over year.
Yeah, I think that's right. Bill, you were kind of mentioning when Kyle was mentioning it's either really positive or really negative. I'm sure. Yeah. Sounds like you have some similar experiences there.
Yeah. So at Amazon, one way that we are kind of calling it a voice of the customer kind of piece is we look at customer reviews like really intensely. We analyze, and there's an internal system that, if I'm not looking at Amazon.com and scrolling through reviews, there's an internal system that kind of helps me organize. But it's always have to remind the team to take that with a grain of salt, because if someone's willing to take that time to write a review on Amazon, it's either something they love or something they hate. In the food space, unfortunately, it's also heavily skewed by I ordered food and it either was delivered bad or like my fruit got smushed in the car on the delivery, which again, it's part of the Amazon supply chain, but like little control over that. But it also reminded me of a project we did when I was at Microsoft. Actually, we went and traveled around the country and talked to some of our best customers in the mid-market kind of B2B space. And essentially that ended up becoming almost another sales point for our sales team. I was supporting our sales team at the time because we were bringing these customers together. We said, you had filled out our customer satisfaction survey. You told us that you were happy with these things, dissatisfied with these things. Let's invite them to kind of, we'll call it like a swanky facility, but a nicer facility, have some drinks and some apps and like just have a really open conversation. And had some sales team members travel with me. And I was like, so you're talking to, senior sales leaders at Microsoft. What do you want them to know? Mm-hmm. And that we then followed those customers for the next year to see what their retention was, what their conversations were. They were already strong customers, but to see them create this personal connection. Again, it's obviously very one-to-one marketing. It's not a huge scalable program, but to use research in that way, I thought was actually really smart.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Terah, I think you mentioned something similar with, the focus groups, like it creates that more of that one-on-one connection, obviously. And the people coming into the group are either they love it or hate it, right? So kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, again, there's the value of what you learn when you're in person with someone and you can read their nonverbals and you can follow up and probe and really get beneath that superficial first gut reaction that people give you. And especially in the food space, I think there's a lot of layers of cultural conditioning, I'll say, of people know what they're supposed to say or what they should think or what they should be doing. Like we all know that there's healthier foods and unhealthier foods and that we should be exercising. So I think what in-person research allowed you to do is build rapport with people to the point that they could move past that, like the pat answer of what I know I should be thinking or what I should be doing, and start to move into a little bit more trust or openness when they, I love that moment. I just love people, but I love that moment when you're talking with people and one person finally admits they're like, yeah, but this is when I don't do the thing. And then all of a sudden the floodgates open of like somebody broke the ice and now everyone's going to share the truth of what they really do. Or even just the more subtle moment when you're in someone's house and they're telling you, again, probably initially the things they should be doing, or they should, that they always read the labels, or, they never snack after dinner, or whatever. And then you go in their pantry and you get some hints that maybe that's not all the story that they're telling you. Right. And then you, again, through rapport and just being human, you can get them to that point where they tell you the exceptions to the rule, which is usually where the really interesting stuff is. So I miss that part of being in person with people, but I do think that there are ways, again, with video and technology, that if you invest the time to really scratch beneath the surface, you can still get to that kind of rich insight, which is really, that's to us what we're always in the hunt for. What's a deeper, richer trigger and insight and motivation that's behind the sort of superficial standard answer?
Right. That makes a lot of sense, I think. And Kyle, you probably had something similar in some of the focus groups that you ran, right? Where maybe a question was asked and the floodgates opened. Anything come to mind there?
Yeah, I think it was always eye-opening to identify, how you think you're communicating like all of their benefits over and over and over again in different ways, and what they get for being a season ticket member and how they're differentiated from, a single game buyer. But once you get them around the table, they're like, well, I didn't know I got this, or I didn't know I got this. And so it just reinforces the fact that the education piece is so important. And, you can't just communicate with consumers in one or two different ways. It needs to be multiple ways to try and, get their attention and make sure that they understand what they're getting and why there's value.
Right. That makes sense. Just a quick moment to remind everybody, use the Q&A function if you have questions. We'll be doing a Q&A coming up in about 15, 20 minutes here. So get your questions in now if you want them answered. I think, switching gears a little bit, Bill, I know you mentioned to me that something that it's somewhat obvious, but it hit home to me, is that the speed of research is always going to accelerate. When you put it like that, it's like, yeah, you're so right. So maybe kind of elaborate on that a little bit and tell people what you mean by that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just having been over a decade now in the industry, just seeing how the tools and the I guess let me start back again. The questions haven't changed all that much. The questions are pretty similar, especially if you stay within the same industry. But the expectation of how it's answered and like when it's answered has changed dramatically. Shifting from companies that have sort of large libraries where they're can instantly pull. Again, it might not be the most up to date, but there's typically some piece of information somewhere floating around a large company with a large research organization that you can get to a partial answer. But as I've kind of continued to move and progress, that doesn't seem to be as acceptable anymore. It's each question becomes more unique, and as customer needs have changed just faster and faster and faster. Digging back into my previous food experience at General Mills, the way, and Terah, you probably are super close to this, is just how quickly food trends have started to change. I mean, you think of like Diet Pepsi, and I worked on Yoplait Life for a while. I mean, that like 80s fake sugar trend lasted for so long. And then all of a sudden, like you got into this more recent period where like keto, paleo, again, I can keep naming food trends out there, how quickly those came and went and advanced, and some stuck around and became more and more niche. So now being able to sort of answer the spectrum of questions on those, again, the teams I've worked with have, because I think in their head, technology is out there that can answer all of these questions very simply. It's sort of the Google effect of they have a question, they type it into Google, they get an answer. They expect research to work similarly, and I think we're being conditioned to have that. And again, research still takes time. There's still legwork. There's still alignment that needs to be done. So as trends and tools just seem to change more and more rapidly, I think the goal of the researcher is just to try to anticipate as much as possible without then overstepping into doing work for the sake of work, and just trying to have set the right expectations, but have answers as quickly as possible.
Right. And then I think that's a good point. And Terah, what are some ways that Kellogg's is sort of staying ahead of trends and identifying these trends using research? Or can you think of anything off the top of your mind?
Yeah, so many things come to mind based on what Bill was saying. I think that I've been around, obviously you mentioned throwing around dates a long time. And there was a time where it was very standard to say a month. It was always a month to get anything. By the time you wrote the questionnaire and proofed it, and I mean, heaven forbid you had to do mul intercept and then wait for tabs to be printed. I mean, it was like a multi-week process at the very best. And I think generationally, there's more millennials in the workforce that have just grown up with the internet, and they have expectations for the Google effect of everything being much more instantaneous. And then we know as researchers, there are instant tools out there in online panels. So I totally agree with everything you're saying in terms of the expectation of speed. But I think we're trying to balance that because there's always a yin and yang, pro and con. We can get answers really fast, but I think what it potentially leads to is people re-asking the same information and us being very inefficient with our resources, because there may be already a secondary data source that has that answer, or maybe we already did that study 6 months or a year ago. Has the answer really changed? Do we really need to check again? Or are we just using resources to cover the same ground we already have? So I think it's a partnership between knowing when is the right time to use something very agile and quick, and when we need to be on the cutting edge of a trend or identifying a trend early, and when we can use some of our knowledge management resources to leverage the data we already have because it's already there. So it is also very fast as long as we can get our hands on it quickly.
Interesting. So it sounds like it's not only like what technologies, but how can the process change to, because you said, well, we don't need to do some of this research. It's already there, but maybe that's more of a change in process as opposed to a change in technology.
Yeah, it's about the behavior of the researcher and where they think to go first. And is it always to go to something primary and start something fresh, or is it to go check what's already on the shelf first and then decide if we need to do something new?
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And then, Kyle, I know, with what Terah was mentioning around, and Bill, I think, was mentioning the same thing around like the Google trend. And you mentioned with millennials, it's, the ticket buying experience is different. You're probably seeing some of those same things and some of the same trends at the NBA, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, the mobile ticketing piece is huge now. And, not only mobile ticketing, but mobile parking passes and, the apps that teams have, and being able to, order concession food on your phone. So all of that data obviously is being collected. And I think, teams are, as quickly as they possibly can, are using it to customize that experience, trying to take the Disney approach and, think about how seamless of an experience it can be when, that customer is pulling up to that parking garage and letting them know, here's the best entrance to come in based on the lines. Your parking garage is here based on where your seat location is. This is the best entrance for you to use. So those types of things are being pulled in and utilized, but absolutely. I mean, we've got to continue to find ways to really customize that experience for those folks that are providing us their data.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that much of a shaped experience, like park here because it's easier to get here. I mean, that's really interesting. Bill, I'm sure at the Amazon stores, you're probably thinking about some of that in terms of maybe some of the things they're going to buy us here, directing them. I don't know, making that up off the cuff, but perhaps, maybe speak to that a little bit.
I would say there's definitely a 2.0 where this data is being better analyzed, better utilized, and more personalized for the customer. I think Amazon is currently learning that grocery is hard, and there's a lot of moving pieces in it. But again, there will be a day when there's carts that there's currently carts where when you put the groceries in, it knows what it is. It shows you on the little screen how much it costs, if there's any coupons, things like that. Again, that seems like prime real estate for, hey, last time you were in, you bought X. Do you want to purchase that again? Or X, like a co-merch, X goes great with Y. You bought the hot dogs, the hot dog buns are in aisle 6. Absolutely see a day where that technology starts to really personalize for the shopper, especially with, the cart technology that's being rolled out. But I think we're still in the process of harnessing all of that before we can, confidently roll that out to customers.
Right, that makes sense.
But it's coming.
Yeah, I bet. So I think let's shift gears a little bit here, and we've been talking a lot about sort of the future and what we see coming down the pipeline. But what are some things that you want to leave behind that you don't want to take with you towards the future? I know, Terah, you mentioned something very specific to me was the purchase interest scale. So maybe explain that a little bit and why you want to leave that behind.
I knew you weren't going to let me off the hook with my Likert pushback. Yeah, so I feel like this goes back to the point of the legacy tools, right? We're very attached to standardized scales and things that we have normative databases against, and we continue to use those. And I feel like they're a bit of a security blanket for us today, because when you really look underneath the surface, so not to be overly controversial, but the tendency to use the 5-point behavioral purchase interest scale and then aggregate the top 2 boxes into a top 2 net and compare that as our sort of one number standard of truth for everything, I think really leaves a lot on the table when we know that that's not how people really think in the grocery store. It's so over rationalized, and we know decision making at shelf isn't that thought through. It's not that carefully considered. And we know so much more about the importance of the speed of the decision or how rational or subconscious it is. And so I feel like there's a million different ways that technology and research design enables us to get better data that talks more about habit and automated responses and the context influences that we could be using to better predict real in-market behavior that will just make us better. Because at the end of the day, as Bill said, grocery is hard. Grocery is a very hard industry to win in. And, we invest a lot of resources in innovation and new product development and marketing. And so I feel like it's my responsibility to the organization to say for sure that I can defend, yes, this product's going to succeed and stick in market. And I find it really hard, other than because we've always done it that way, to defend a top 2 box score.
Interesting. Bill, what are your thoughts on the...
Yeah, I actually totally agree with that. I think the days of it has its place, and I just think it's shifted way up in the development process of here's a big think like claim sort, flavor sort, here's 50, which that's too many, but here's a lot of concepts, go through them and help us prioritize where we can then go do the right research to, dig into which of these, because again, if you're launching something, again, we just launched a mac and cheese, like it's 3 SKUs total. Like, we had a flavor variety, we had 15 flavor varieties to pick from. We launched 3. How do we time it where let's use, again, happy to use kind of looser, rougher data up front to get from 15 to 7, 5, and then get down to 3 that I really could defend going forward and say, we put these through the ringer. The research is rigorous. It's, we're confident that these 3 are the right 3 for our customer. And how does that align to our customers' needs? But totally agree. Just, a purchase intent scale at the very end is something that, again, we still use. It's, but again, a flat on paper concept can only take you so far. It'll give you so much confidence.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And then, Kyle, did you experience something similar at the MBA or in your current role where if it's purchase intent, maybe with season ticket holders or whatnot, have you had something similar where it's like, hey, this doesn't really get at the root of what we're trying to answer here?
I just think that, we just kind of have to continue to think about the people behind all of this and just how important, the employees are to creating what it's like. And, I think that, everything that we're doing from a digital world, technology world to enhance what that customer experience looks like, we should, try and mirror those same tactics to what our employees are experiencing day in, day out, from an onboarding standpoint to creating kind of that connection. It's certainly a best practice to, get the folks that are face to face with our customers and have them, continually interact with our HR group and share and communicate what those tactics are, so the 2 are kind of equal. Is something that I would recommend.
Right. Got it. That makes a lot of sense, I think. So in terms of things that you want to see left behind, what are maybe some of those things that you want to continue or pull into the future, right? Like, I want to leave purchase intent behind, but I want this to come with me. Bill, do you have any thoughts around that? Like things you want to still remain a thing amongst the speed, the research is always going to continue to accelerate here?
Yeah, and I think part of this is just having 2 food folks on the call is like, people still need to taste food that don't work on the brand or in the company. Again, that's been really hard with COVID, and Amazon's big enough that we can kind of find people, but food tastes differ regionally. It just doesn't make sense as a national rollout if that's what the intent is. Can you hit the price point you want to hit? But ultimately, food is always kind of a taste, price, value equation. And again, it's labor intensive. It's hard to get people either into a central facility or you have to ship stuff, and there's a ton of logistics there. But the idea of launching food brands and not having people get the full experience from like opening the box to prepping it. We've seen a lot of products fail because the prep is weird. To that final, like, my whole family ate this versus I love this, but like my kids aren't going to eat this, so I'm never going to buy it again. Again, and it's one of those, I haven't figured out a way to have people not eat the product to like finally, feel confident with the product, or finally have that, not have that be a step in research for food development.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. We are getting some comments here, Bill, that people are volunteering to taste the food. So if you want, I have some people lined up for you.
I'll say some days it's great. Again, there's plenty of ice cream and chocolate tastings, and then other days it's like clam chowder and beans, which is much less enjoyable.
They signed up for it, right? So
yeah.
Terah, is it something similar, or what are your thoughts on things that you don't want to see left behind and you want them to continue? Is it something what Bill said, or do you maybe a mix of that and your own thoughts there?
Well, I think just to build on that and maybe expand a little bit more, I think there are many pieces of the tools that we're used to using that are very standard, like heat mapping or eye tracking or video markup, that help us take the litany of scales of the 7-point scale and the 8-point scale and the purchase interest scale and the net promoter score, and these things that we're used to putting all of our attention and focus on because it makes everything seem very linear and clean cut. And I think those other tools that are a little bit more intuitive and allow people to just react with their gut without overthinking are where we often really get the deeper insight. So, let people take a product home and use it themselves and just video record themselves, where they don't have to filter and explain as much as you can just observe naturally. Oh, they totally missed a prep step. That's why it didn't heat well. And then they were disappointed, or I had no idea that they were eating that without milk. And that would totally change the way we formulated it. Whatever those things are that I think just leaving people to react naturally and more organically, even just evaluating advertising in a natural context. We can let go of the forced exposure if we know that YouTube is the future and people are going to skip and they're going to be distracted. And that's the real world we're living in. And that's the real world we should be collecting our data in.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. I think that, like, going back to the purchase interest scale, right? Or intent, that's not how people buy things, right? So you got to try to mirror that buying experience. So that's interesting. I think, Kyle, when you were at the NBA, did you do any sort of like, hey, we're going to sit with the season ticket holder, or any of those sorts of experiences to really get your, I guess, mind in that same frame set? Or what would you say to that? Or what were some of those things that you did there?
Yeah. So, a lot of what we did was we would experience, attend a ton of games throughout the season ticket member events, and try as best as we could to kind of like fit in ourselves with the customers and kind of, start from the parking lot, park our cars, walk in, go without our credentials, and, really kind of gain and provide as much feedback as we could to the team, coming out of that. So that's how we really tried to support teams, is just, attending games as a fan and coming back with as much feedback as we possibly could, talking to other season ticket members about their experiences, and really kind of being an arm of that organization to kind of help them out in that space.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I actually just want to touch on that. I love the, it's so hard to do, but if you can get your leadership team to kind of go through the customer journey without them being able to wave a pass and say, I'm a high up person at this company, let me in. It is super, super powerful. One of the most powerful things I've seen was, and again, I previously at Microsoft machines take a while to boot up occasionally, or that you hit the, updates that you don't want. And this was right when Google was launching their Chromebooks that you just like out of the box, push the button and it goes. And we were with leadership, and like someone just pulled both out on a table, like in a sealed box, pushed the button on both to turn them on. And I mean, the Google Chromebook was up and running within a matter of minutes, or I mean, maybe not even. And, the Windows machine did its thing where it's updating and doing, which again, it does that for the right reasons. But to see that, like, leadership had never experienced that in context, because they work at Microsoft. They always are on Microsoft machines. They know what's happening behind the scenes and why it's doing that. But to see them have to experience that live, and then to start to see them start to spin on like, how do we solve this? What does this mean for our customer journey, was so, so powerful. And again, it's not related to the question, but I just love that the idea of getting leadership to go through the customer journey as a true customer, and not as someone who can, make magic happen by name dropping.
Right. That's a great point. Terah, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I was just going to build on it too, from the other perspective of going back to that human experience. I feel like I've delivered millions of PowerPoint decks that had great data and really solid results, and important information that no one will ever remember ever happened. But 15 years later, you could be in a San Diego grocery market with a mom with 3 kids, and I could hit that person up in the hallway at work, and they would still remember that experience of, I can't believe that that's what she thought, and she didn't realize, whatever it was. It's just so much more sticky, I think, when people experience it for themselves. And I don't want to lose that. I think as we progress and become even more AI driven and technology oriented in the way we collect data, the one thing I don't want to have us lose is that human connection, because it's so much more sticky.
Interesting. Well, I think that's a good point. It reminds me of the show Undercover Boss. Did you guys ever seen that? We need to have a show like Undercover Researcher, and kind of, here's an idea. Okay, we have ideas on this panel. I like it. Great. Well, I think I could keep talking to you all day, but let's get to some questions that people had here. Let me bring these up, and then I think there was a question specific. Bill, I'll start with you here. Let me find it. Okay. To Bill, so this is to you around the cart experience at Amazon. I think you mentioned around hot dogs and then asking, hey, do you need buns? But you see it going to the next step of, hey, last time you bought hot dogs, you also bought chips and dip. But do you want to add that to your cart? Is that on the horizon? Is that how you're thinking about things? Or maybe kind of speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, and again, I don't know,
Sure.
again, what's been rolled out and what hasn't, but this is something that I think is in the works. Again, and this is based purely my own speculation based on how Amazon operates in their online channel. They are trying to customize, and constantly, I mean, they're A/B testing all the time. Anytime you open Amazon, you're getting an A/B test. So they're really trying to understand that buyer behavior and recommend things to make you put one more thing in the cart. Again, it's that the algorithm just spins constantly. It keeps getting better. It keeps improving. And I think once we can figure out a way to harness that in store, I think Amazon would love to make that experience more cohesive to the .com experience. So I think the translation the other way would be like online aisles. So hey, I'm shopping the cereal aisle, like rather than having to type in specifically, I want I want Cheerios, like I just kind of go down the cereal aisle and shop. So it's a little bit different. But I think what Amazon wants to do ultimately is have a super customized, super personalized algorithm that's recommending product, both from past purchases and also using the data it's collecting from people like you to give you some incentive to try something new.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. I think that when you talk about experiences, really in-depth experience, like from the whole journey, I think that's really, really interesting. Yeah. A question came up from Edward Hugh. Has Kellogg's ever considered using Airbnb for market research? Full transparency. He's the co-founder. Okay. But have you ever, I guess, what type of experimental sampling would provide a valid data for this group, and using Airbnb for market research? Have you ever thought about something like that?
I'm guessing it's just a different location in which to do the research. Yeah. Not Airbnb specifically, but I think for quite a long time, we have tried to do any sort of in-person research in a more natural, organic environment. So we've done all kinds of things where you meet in a game room, where you meet in a hotel, like where you would have a event or a wedding or whatever, and set up stations where we can get our internal people right face to face, like someone else was talking about, with the consumer rather than behind a mirror. So when you're at a small table with someone, or you're just sitting in a couple of lounge chairs and you're talking face to face, and they can ask you questions and you can ask them questions, it's much different than when you've got a moderator with a script and you're sort of at arm's length from them. So everything from, one of my favorite and also most hated projects of all time was we were talking to young people who were really active about their snack and energy needs. And we went out and did whatever they do with them: play soccer, run, swim, bike, whatever it was. I hate to run. That's why I hated it, because I was like, really? They're paying for me to do this, so I guess I have to do it. But it's just different when you get people in a more natural and casual environment. I don't think anyone just off the street super comfortable around a boardroom table with a giant mirror on the wall. So I'm totally supportive of the theory. It's just really, for us, what's the right situation that's going to get us closest to the moment of truth for consumers, and how do we find a way to replicate that in the most natural way possible?
Right. And Kyle, it sounds like you, when you're at the NBA, you had some similar sort of experience where you wanted to try to replicate that as close as possible, or maybe even in your current role. Anything come to mind there outside of what we've already touched on?
I think outside of putting ourselves in the customer's shoes, I can't think of anything specific. I know with Airbnb, I don't have specific examples of us using them for market research, but we did take a lot of their experience platform ideas and incorporate them into our teams as a kind of a virtual opportunity for us to engage with members during the pandemic. So a lot of those same types of experiences, we would tap into the assets of each of our teams with chefs on site, and the athletic trainers and coaching staff, and conduct really kind of targeted events. So, really mimicked a lot of what Airbnb has done over this past year.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that the experiences that Airbnb creates is really, really interesting. And then a question for you, Kyle. There's an NBA fan here. So what fan base was the most interesting for market research? And it looks like they're a Lakers fans, so they said go Lakers. But was there any fan base that was a little more interesting than the others?
I mean, the New York fan base is always, always an interesting one. They're super passionate. Of course, the Lakers, that fan base is extremely loyal, which is awesome for that organization. The WNBA fan base is probably one of the most passionate league-wide that I've seen. They know all the players. They know, they've been there from the very beginning. They're probably one of the most knowledgeable league fan bases that I've seen, and that are really in it for the game and for the players. So yeah, it's a fun group for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Great. So there's another question from Blair Cronk. They ask, the more we look through the customer lens to make product improvements, the more that the customer will expect, especially when your competition is doing the same thing. His question is, will there be continued innovation through UX design, et cetera, in the future, or will we get to a point where the customer is well served with wonderful design and then we can move on? So is UX design going to come to a point where, I'm kind of summarizing the question, is UX design going to come to a point where the customer is already well served enough and we can move on, or do you think there's still a need for UX design in the future? I guess Bill, Terah,
yeah, again, not super well versed in this area, but my gut reaction is that as long as the external context continues to change around it, the needs will keep evolving and the UX will need to keep evolving to keep up with it. So again, if we were to stay static with everything else happening in the universe, I think UX could kind of end. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I would build on that too. I think, within a very finite space, so within this particular food form and this particular format, yeah, you probably do have a point of diminishing return where you've made the experiences is incrementally improved as it's ever going to be, and you're going to kind of tap out potential. But I think at a more macro level, there's always going to be larger change going on. Our world is not slowing down. So who knows what the next iPhone or the next internet thing is going to be, but I can't anticipate a point in the future at which everything's so steady state that there's no upside for us to improve. It's just a matter of, we don't know what it is until we get there. I mean, I think 2 years ago, I would have told you that, I didn't know what the next big thing in research would be. And then COVID happened and we had to completely reinvent everything we were doing. So I really find it hard to believe that there'll be some point in the future where we all can just sit back and take extra vacation.
And
right.
This is speaking from the food space perspective, but there's just so many new entrants, new players trying to fill these niche needs that, the large food manufacturers or large food retailers can't service all of that with the resources they have, or some of the opportunities. Again, the math and the research would show it's not a big enough opportunity to go after, but there's a small, dedicated, passionate team that's going after it and can take it big. And I think there's always going to be those small, new, agile players. I think there's going to be more and more of those as we move forward. And I think they're going to continue to push a lot of the really differentiated thinking. I think in being willing to try something new, having that passion for an idea that, again, the math may not work on the back end immediately, which for most large organizations is a deal breaker from the start. And then they'll continue to push.
Right. I think that makes a lot of sense as well. I'm just kind of looking through the questions here. Another one, I guess this is a little bit, kind of related to what are some of the things you want to leave behind in that regard, but any repetitive tasks that are mandatory, but you find exhausting that you have to do, maybe we don't need to go through all of them here, but what are some of those things that, yeah, it's a pain, but we know we have to do it? Anything come to mind there?
I mean, no one wants to have to deal with, complaints or the problem solving piece. So we kind of, I think, we think about like the positives. We're like, let's just focus on like making it a great experience and like, planning events and all of that. But I think ultimately like the basics are super important with, if someone has a problem, like how do we ensure that the process is seamless where they get it fixed immediately? And, our phone systems allow for you to get to a live person immediately. And, how do we enhance our websites to, ensure that someone can get it solved, right on the spot. So I think those types of things, certainly the organizations that do it really well stand out. And I think more need to rise up in that space for sure.
Interesting. I know, Vivek, you had a question. Do you want to ask me?
Yeah, I do. Thank you so much, panelists. I have a question. We talk a lot about ethnographic research or qualitative data to kind of lead with qualitative conversations. Do you guys find it hard to sell that concept to stakeholders because everybody is data-driven, everybody is quantitative, by kind of want to be data-driven, quantitative? So you sell them on the idea like actually we need to go hang out with some customers. To stakeholders, can you kind of shed some light into like how you sell them internally? I think the internal process around that.
I mean, I can definitely say yes. Amazon is very, very data driven. They have all of the data to use, and it's all documented. And we write doc after doc that has to have very specific, hard data to really move projects forward. And where we are at now in the kind of evolution of this grocery project, again, our stores opened 4 months ago, so recently. We have brands that are entering the store, just recently, new products. And the way we've had to sell this in is the data doesn't exist yet. Like that's been the only way I've been able to find it. Because I've been getting asked for things like brand trackers and brand perception measures. Again, we have brands that have existed for 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I think our store awareness is something like less than 5% at this point because we're so new. So surveying people about something that has less than 5% awareness isn't going to get us anywhere unless we then like laser focus the survey into people who already know it. And again, you get some data issues there. So that's honestly been the way I've been able to sell this in is the data just truly doesn't exist. As we get more and more data, I think it's going to be harder and harder to sell this into this team.
And just to build on that, I think from my perspective, it's all about the triangulation of there's no one perfect data source. So the agile tools really enable us to be able to get open-ended or qualitative feedback super fast from consumers. So when you're building a survey, I think any researcher's anxiety is, am I putting the right attributes in there? Do I have the right list? Am I measuring the right things? And so the ability to go out and actually ask consumers, what are you thinking about or what's important to you, and make sure that there's nothing that you've missed on the table that you want to put into that list, just makes for a better survey and better quantitative data. And then I have never seen a quantitative study, no matter how expensive or thorough or technical, that at the end of the day didn't lead to more questions. It answers questions and then it opens more questions. And I think that's another great intersection where you could say, right, I know this doesn't really make sense. This seems to be saying one thing and this seems contradictory. How can that be? And that's an opportunity for us to say, let's go talk to people about it. Let's figure out what's going on there. What were they thinking? And what are they interpreting that we may be missing here that could help us fill out the story?
Got it. Thanks. And Kyle, do you find it easier or harder to sell quantitative or qualitative research? I'm just curious internally.
Yeah. It's probably harder, like the qualitative piece, because it's probably more time consuming and it takes more manpower, especially for the teams that are limited with people, and you have a lot of people doing multiple jobs at once. So I think that's probably the tougher one. So I think it's just about how you can sell what you want to get out of it and kind of show the end result and then work your way backwards. It's probably the best way that we could potentially do that within a team.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. I think that might be all of the questions we have. Let me double check here. All right. I think those are all the questions. So I think we can wrap this up. Kyle, Bill, Terah, thank you so much for joining us today. Super interesting conversation. And yeah, thanks again. So much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.